I'm here this morning with Ricardo Ferreira and José António P, and we're here to discuss the value of clinical trials, data sharing, and specifically what we've learned about advances in rheumatology. Vivli is a data sharing platform, and we hope that will be used to help advance understanding of diseases. So it'd be interesting to hear how you heard about Vivli, and in general, what value there is to having such a thing like a data sharing platform.
Well, for us, it was pivotal, really. I think that we have made a very important piece of research and an important contribution to the field, which would have been impossible without this sharing of data. It's also very important for us that we don't just consider one trial, even if it was large enough, but we have different trials designed differently, carrying over from different populations as well, and having, of course, each one of them their own risk of bias. But by combining it all, I think that we can hope that it kind of, resolves itself out, and we have a general view with a very, very large number of very diverse patients. And I think this is very important also because even in practice, when we are looking at different domains like efficacy of medications, for instance, the issue of how well do randomized controlled trials represent the actual patient population is always a problem. And so, in my view, if we can have access to individual patient data and combining them, this can be extremely important, particularly when, as in our case, you are trying to understand overarching concepts that will affect the understanding of the results of the trials and also the understanding of the foundations of practice. Now, we couldn't do this with a single trial. It's wonderful that we had different medications because it's not a specific thing. How does it really affect the patient? And how important is that? So for us, it was really a wonderful and a very, very, let's say, rewarding experience. And we are hoping to take it further, as Ricardo already told you.
To add on the value of accessing individual patient data across different trials, it's also the chance to uniformize methods and definitions and timelines, which increases the power and the strength of the analysis. And to respond to the question on how did we know about Vivli, in fact, we started by accessing the data individually by the sites of each sponsor. So using different methods of sharing with many platforms, many passwords, assessing each one with a different computer, each one using a different software to analyze data, from SAS to Stata to R to others. And during the process, the sponsors started a transition. Almost all migrated into Vivli, and then we followed the leader. We followed the steps, and it was for me, who was the one dealing with the more technical bureaucracy. It was a great improvement to access the data from many sponsors into a system developed with that specific purpose, and it facilitated me a lot my tasks, saving me a lot of time, which is important for other more specific things.
Did you find it easy to look at data across the studies? What if they were measuring things slightly differently? And did you find the process in Vivli easy to accommodate your requests?
When they migrated their databases, I think it was a bit easier by having the same team managing or being the interlocutor between the researchers and the sponsors also facilitates the uniformization.
And I also agree that it was a tremendous improvement when we moved from different platforms, different statistical programs, and we had it all in one place. Understandably, in the beginning, it was more difficult, and then later on, it became easier and more reliable.
Yes, I think it was a learning process also for the sponsors, because they were also migrating. And also, for instance, having a single chat for all people to communicate makes the things clear, and also help to be faster in answering the requirements.
I think part of Vivli's mission is to not only have the principle of data sharing, but actually make it practical and pragmatic and easier for people to not only load the data, but then to be able to analyze and understand it to help advance science. So it'd be good to understand how we've advanced in the management of rheumatoid arthritis and where we've still got to go.
The progress has been absolutely enormous. We are now talking about refining treatment in trying to get good responses to people who are already doing quite well. One needs to realize that about 2/3 of all patients in randomized clinical trials and also in practice do not achieve full remission. We still have room for improvement. We still have unmet needs. But what we have actually addressed is that a sizable proportion of these people who do not reach target, this is due to reasons that are not really related to disease activity. So they cannot be addressed by immunosuppressive medications, even being as good as they are nowadays.
It is a tremendous development in the drugs, but we were more interested in the strategy while using the drugs, namely in the targets and how we assess the target. And that was our main focus, because we think we are currently mixing apples with oranges, and we are very probably asking too much from the anti-TNF alpha and other drugs.
You know, sometimes in diseases, you're managing the disease activity, but you're not necessarily helping the patient. And it sounds like you were looking at a strategy where you might be looking at, you know, joint pain, swelling, and inflammatory markers, which is really about the disease activity, as well as thinking about the global patient well-being and assessment. So it'd be good to understand what that dual strategy is, and also why it couldn't be addressed in one single study. So take me into the more specifics about what you were trying to achieve, and then how you were able to achieve it using the Vivli platform across the studies.
Many of our patients, as many as 40%, did not reach a remission, so they did not reach targets as prescribed by the American College of Rheumatology and EULAR, just because they have a patient global assessment of disease activity higher than 1. The definition of target includes that swollen joints, tender joints, the CRP in milligrams per deciliter, and the patient global assessment in a scale of 0 to 10 should all be below 1. And so what we have found is that a lot of our patients were not satisfied with their condition, but the disease was under control. So if we followed strictly the recommendations, we would not be satisfied and should go to the next step on treatment, which would mean reinforcing immunosuppressive therapy. So the issue is that it doesn't make clinical sense for us. So by our early studies, we came to the proposal that patient global assessment did not have a good relationship with disease activity at the low levels of disease activity when you decide whether to increase therapy or not. Although overall, you do have a good relationship because people who have a very, very active disease have high PGA, and appropriately so. But when the disease comes down and they reach remission, about half of them are still not satisfied in their PGA. It's still higher than 1. And you shouldn't increase immunosuppressive therapy from our point of view. For us to really guide well the immunosuppressive therapy, and for us also to give the appropriate value to these medications, we should have, we believed, a 3-variable definition of remission. Exclude the patient global from that. Only consider tender and swollen joints and the CRP. Is there a difference between a 3-variable definition of remission and the 4-variable definition of remission in predicting the structural outcome long term. And so this is why we thought we need to have access to data from different trials. What we want to test is this overarching concept of remission. Can we improve the definition? And this definition, in a time where rheumatology has adhered very strongly to the treat to target concept, defining target is absolutely essential. We believe that this is important work and it could not have been done without this kind of sharing of data.
What were the key findings that you were able to find that you would not have done or known before from the single study? What have you learned?
Dropping out the PGA from the 4 Boolean remission criteria, so the 3V, had a similar prediction ability than the patients who failed only the PGA but had the other 3 criteria fulfilled. In fact, the 3V criteria was even more accurate when considering the true positive and the true negative data. But when we try to explain our message of dropping the PGA from a composite measure, the people don't listen to the second part of the message. They stop us and say, no, we can't forget the patient. But then we try, and this is a continuous work. You need to include the patient in a different and more comprehensive way, asking for the pain. What is bothering you? What can I help you to achieve? What are your life goals? And if we forget that single difficult question of the patient global assessment, we can go deeper into exploring fatigue, pain, stress, or other problems, and find adjunctive therapies, drug and non-pharmacological therapies to support those needs.
If you can explain then what the value is moving ahead for future clinical trials, and then what the value is to the patient themselves with these findings.
I believe that what we have demonstrated by demonstrating that 3-variable and 4-variable are equally predictive of radiographic damage is that those people who would have been invited to increase their immunosuppressive therapy because they did not reach remission solely because of the patient global assessment, they would be overtreated with immunosuppressants. And this is as many as 18% of all patients included in those trials. Overtreatment is something of concern to the patient, to society, to pharmaceutical companies. On the other hand, it is also an issue of providing to the pharmaceutical companies a fair recognition of the value of their drugs, because you can't expect immunosuppressants to treat pain from osteoarthritis, or you can't expect an anti-TNF or another biological agent to resolve depression. So a lot of unmet needs of the patients that make them have a higher PGA are not addressed. I don't know what's driving the PGA. My patient is already in remission. Now the PGA is uninformative. So this is why we have come to propose that all in all, in rheumatoid arthritis, and I believe that it would be easily amenable to other diseases as well, we ought to consider 2 different targets. So we call it the dual target strategy. One of them is a very sharp focus for immunosuppressive therapy. We call it the biological target, the control of the disease process. And the other one, we call it the impact or the symptom target. They are very related. They are not the same. We hope that the impact target will provide a much better opportunity for the patient to have his unmet needs addressed. They could not be expected to be resolved by additional immunosuppressants.
So a couple of questions from the people who've been doing the individual clinical trials. Were they resistant to your meta-analysis? And then having got the results, how do they feel about your results?
We have been very satisfied with some resonance regarding our studies. Many people interested in empathy, in separating the 2 things, in understanding the patient's needs in a better way. We hope that we will be able to influence the field further in the future. But we have been surprised that some pharmaceutical companies were not interested in exploring this 3V, 4V thing in their own practice, in their own trials. They seem to be listening to the message only to the first half. I'm taking the PGA away. I'm forgetting patients. I'm ignoring patients. So I think that pharmaceutical companies are still divided with this concept. And maybe they will continue to be until it is more brought into the definitions of ACR and ULAR, and we certainly hope that we can influence that.
Having this second target will also pave the way to improve and to have a better multidisciplinary teamwork in the departments. The rheumatologists will need to deal with depression, with foot orthosis, with other areas. It is more likely that they will try to have a podiatrist, psychologist, more nurses.
Controlling the disease process is certainly a vital goal towards a higher goal: satisfaction with life, duration with life, the enjoyment of life.
What's exciting for me as a member of the Vivli team is to realize that we've been able to find some clinical answers that are relevant to the patients by using the platform to look across studies and found information that you would not have got by losing individual studies. So it sounds like you've had great success using the platform. And really, I'd like to ask, would you use it again? And what other questions do you want to ask that you will be able to use the platform that are still unanswered?
We have currently a project approved on Vivli to pursue further studies. And these studies, for instance, will address two things. One, we'll look the effect of more sustained definitions of remission. So not measuring it only in 2 time points during the first year, but measuring the influence of achieving remission through all the process of care. And also because we only studied the Boolean definition, which takes into account the 4 criteria as dichotomically below or above 1. We now want to look into the other composite indexes supported by the American College of Rheumatology, NEOLAR, because they are part of the definition and they are much more used in the clinical practice, contrarily to the Boolean definition.
If the idea of this dual target makes sense, not only of rheumatic diseases, but other conditions as well, bringing the interests of the patients up front and making clear how you are best controlling the disease in terms of long-term consequences for the patient. Similar studies could be done in a variety of other areas. I think it could be widespread.
For this specific project, you gained a lot of value in looking across the studies. You've got some real messages to make a difference in rheumatoid arthritis. But it sounds like you'd be a supporter of encouraging people to put data on the platform to share and then encourage people to ask questions. So maybe as we close out, just final comments on the value of Vivli and what you would tell other people about Vivli.
Maybe Vivli can also integrate databases from single departments, from registries. It will be interesting to have not only RCTs, but also data from registries available in such practical and open way.
We're already thinking through that. We're exploring that as an option.
But there is also one aspect that I think it's very, very important for the pharmaceutical industry and for the medical community in general for the future, and that is an issue of transparency. There is a growing concern in the community that, truth is something that you never know, and that the results that come out of pharmaceutical companies may be truncated to their interests. But this tends to increase with the use of the social media, also of the abilities of the information technology to manipulate data and to manipulate information. People are more suspicious, and they need to have more transparency. So I'm all in favor of the concept that the data from clinical trials should be made public. And so I think that we would all profit from that, including the trust in pharmaceutical companies.
Wholeheartedly agree. I mean, at Vivli, we want to have access, data there, data sharing, data visible, down to the individual level. I think ultimately it helps everyone in confidence, and it also helps advance science and clinical benefit to patients ultimately. So I'd like to thank you both for your time today. Great conversation. Hopefully you continue to use Vivli and gain information that will help patients. Thank you.